good enough for a medical interpretation of very specific things between a patient and a doctor is very different. And that is where you cannot say, well, it's good enough.
Welcome back to BoostCast, the show where we explore the intersection of language, technology, and global business. I'm your host, Dieter Runge, and today's episode dives deep into how AI is transforming the language technology sector. Today, at this moment, language tech companies and language service companies are redefining quality, overhauling processes, and challenging long-standing industry norms. My guest today is Stevan Relic, Director of Integrations at Unbabel. Stevan is a seasoned localization architect and consultant with over 15 years of experience. He is specialized in helping companies, organizations streamline their localization and language technology strategies, maximize revenue through smarter workflows, and optimize machine translation and AI applications across various different industries. Today's topic, the strategic language technology glow up, AI process innovation, quality transformations. Let's get into it. Stevan, welcome. By the way, glow up generally refers to that incredible transformation of going from bottom to top. A Gen Z word I have ripped off and like to use, but it's here for my purposes today, and we're talking about significant transformation in our industry, so seemed appropriate. Stevan, you've seen the localization landscapes over the last few years evolve dramatically. What would you say is the most profound shift that you observed since AI and large-scale MT entered the scene?
Hi, Dieter. First of all, thank you for the invite. This is amazing. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Let's start there. I've seen it's very similar to when first machine translation, actually neural machine translation hit the scenes, because we had statistical machine for a while. It just wasn't working. Then all of a sudden neural machine translation came over and everybody started, getting into neural and jumping. And right now it's all about AI, which again, a lot of companies and people and people using it are looking at, well, does it translate? The big question, does it translate? Yeah, but it also does a host of other things that can be helpful to the whole process across. And I think those are just right now being checked at the surface, if you know what I mean. They're just right now being discovered. I think the biggest shift is the speed at which it lets new companies come into something, especially if you work in the translation business, at the speed at which new companies, startups can go global very quickly, very fast, with a interesting, I would say, degree of quality. So I think that's the biggest shift I'm seeing from industry buyers. Within the industry, though, there's a big shift of let's use AI here, let's use AI there, of course, or translators in the industry and interpreters are, starting to see how their work also shifts. We just need to see how it's going to be implemented. I think that's the big shift.
Yeah, just looking at how we are going to address these accelerated times, rethinking how we work, and not just bolting the AI on, but taking a step back and not doing it the old ways that we used to, right?
Yeah, but also understanding that it's not like everybody, there's conversations. It's always side and side conversations. It's always the guitar string. You tense it too much, it breaks. You loosen it too much, it doesn't sound. It's gonna revolve. It's gonna revolutionize everything. We're gonna be doing everything completely different in 2 years. I don't think that's the case. Will we be doing things completely different in 5 to 6 years? Maybe. To me, it's very analogous to digital photography in the 2000s. A lot of print shops used to, you take your roll to print, and that definitely disappeared. But photography hasn't disappeared; it's just gotten better. So there's a conversation here about how it evolves. That's where my head's at.
And yet you can now go buy Polaroid cameras and film cameras again in the stores, right?
All of a sudden, retro is in the mode. Yeah,
retro is, My
Yeah.
my son came up to me requesting a camera that uh, and I was just like, do they still make those? And
Yep.
they sure do. They sure do, and
Yep.
they're making them with some great volume these days. But uh, it's a great point, and that analogy of tightening the guitar string that's a really great way to put it. Um, so let me ask you, like in your view, what do most companies get wrong or do not expect when they're trying to implement AI within their processes, especially at scale? Um, what where do they often misstep or find to be a bit of a surprise?
Well, in our word, in translations, be it interpretation, be it translation, localization, and I think it expands across the board. But I think what is not seen is that the process to do it correctly starts at you as a company rather than starting at who are you picking up to help you with it, if that makes sense. A lot of your processes need to be aligned to something. A lot of your processes need to be able to do certain things properly before you can even pass it over to translate. So this is the old well, it's an AI adagio too, but it's an old MT adagio, garbage in, garbage out, that I think very much speaks to processes too. Like, as a simple example, I can tell you the following. I've worked with so many enterprises in the last 10 to 12 years where um, localization, if you want to say it like that, or even any type of translation, is just a second thought. It happens when I need it to happen. That
Yeah,
is a bit different for interpretation, where some of the core businesses, like, I do need interpretation, right? But look at large enterprises. I just had recently a conversation where an enterprise was acquired by a company in Japan. So now all of a sudden they need executive conversations within the company to be interpreted at a high degree of quality, because the Japanese executives do not speak English, or don't want to speak English, don't want to speak in their own language, and the people from this company also need to understand them in their own terms. So you need interpretation, right? But that happened because the company was acquired, right? That's one specific example. So what I'm trying to point out here is nobody was ready for it. So in this case, where did it fall through, or who had to manage this? Well, the community, or the marketing, or the audiovisual team within the company were not ready for this kind of thing. There is
yeah,
no there is no department that manages this. Very similar to, let's take any random SaaS company or any product company that starts over. You have some pillars for it to function. You need to have HR for your people. You need to have
yeah,
finance for, of course, payments. You need to have your product. You need to have your marketing department. You need to have your sales department. Have you ever heard of a language department in a startup company? No,
yeah,
because you sell regionally. You don't get there until you get there. Oh, now we're ready to grow. But then at that point, you don't have a language department. What do I do now? This is where this whole idea of LangOps comes in. But I think companies don't see it until it's in front of them, and at that stage making those decisions are not part it's not part of strategy anymore, it's part of tactics. And when you
right.
make those decisions are as part of realigning tactics within the department, it doesn't really work. I think at a high level, that is what a lot of companies, I wouldn't say get wrong, they don't expect it, and they take a lot of time to learn.
Yeah,
And that's part of the challenge. This is where this whole language idea comes in. Like, larger enterprises will have their language departments. They're not called LangOps, but they will have some type of work towards language departments. It's usually like high level enterprises. When you're growing up, that doesn't come to mind, and I think that's what needs to be addressed.
yeah. It's not part of the natural dialogue
Yes.
yet at the C-suite
Yeah.
level, right? And I mean, and we did have a discussion a few episodes back with some of the folks from the LangOps team, and I mean, I love it. I bought in. I think every few years our industry has tried to um, rename, reposition, do a better job of advocating for ourselves to happen sooner in the conversation, and I think LangOps is perfect.
Yeah.
If we can accept DevOps, if we can accept, RevOps, we can sure as heck process and accept LangOps, and it's important because it's the sooner you're talking about it, the better. You know, I see LangOps, what you've described, as the incredibly important change management function within organizations, no matter what size or scale of that operation. I think it needs to be a strata of change management.
Yeah.
And this time spelling change CHAINGE.
Yeah, exactly. With that a challenge that, contrary to what I'm trying to say here, the challenge with LangOps is you literally cannot have it day one unless you're going to go global day one, because LangOps on day one might be cost, and maybe you don't want to do that. So it's exactly tying to what you're saying. It needs to be thought of as change management, but it needs to be thought of before you get to the point, and that is what doesn't happen. Like you don't, like, you get to the point where, oh, we are great on our regional structure, now we need to grow, but you always get there with now what, and this now what is the challenge.
Yeah. When it becomes an afterthought, then it becomes a complete tactical and reaction mode, right? So,
yes.
Interpreting is often treated separately from translation workflows, which vexes me, frankly. Do you see a future where interpreting becomes more integrated in terms of being part of that centralized language operation?
Absolutely.
Flow.
It's still language. That's what I see it as. Like, it doesn't matter if it's interpreting translation of written word or transcription. It's still language, or basically transcription and translation. So I gave you the specific example of the company that needed now to interpret from their executives for a reason. That should be managed by a language operation department. What if the team that is trying to manage that doesn't have the budget, or actually bites into their operational budget for other important things across the board just to manage this thing? It's not planned, it's just ad hoc. So definitely needs to be part of a LangOps initiative. Now, that absolutely depends on what the company in itself does, how it's globally set up, where the offices, do they need this, do they not? So it has some dependencies. But having said that, interpretation is definitely part of translation. As such, it should of course belong to some type of language operation.
Stevan, how do you see the approach in terms of balance between speed, scale, and quality in the workflows that rely on AI, MT, and automation? Is there always a trade-off?
Yeah, that the famous three levers, right? I think usually there was a wide gap. You lift one, and then the other two go down, and that's it, and you have a gap. I think that gap has now gotten very, very close. It's still there though.
Yeah.
Let me. I'm just gonna veer off for a bit and come back, because
you could have three options, pick two, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting because it also depends on content lifecycle, and that's important. As in, let me make you an example. If you look at translations, and I'm going to make this analogy. If you look at translation, translation lives static, like it's a document. The life cycle of it is long. You have a document, it can be a website, a product description, anything. You can translate it, wait for it, not publish it, review any errors, any mistakes, and set it up. So the life cycle is long, and it's going to be there for a while. When you have interpretation in the mix, it's very different, because you have and also customer support, for example, chats, chatbots or chat conversations back and forth, same thing. It's the life cycle is very short. Like, if somebody were translating what we're speaking about now and they make a mistake, the mistake happened. That's it. There's no going back, especially if it's live. There's no resetting it. There's no redoing. So the quality levels vary a lot on the content type structure, and actually the way you're gonna measure quality, not measure, sorry, the word is the way you're gonna preempt quality challenges varies on the basis of the content lifecycle. So those levers also depend on what are you doing. Is it interpretation? Is it translation? What is it? Now, having said that, with AI, the gap within the levers has gotten a lot less. But still, If you're going to use humans in interpretation, there's going to be a latency. That latency will always lower your speed, but it will improve your quality. Just that the movement of the levers in my head, or what I'm seeing, is it's a lot smaller. It used to be, let's say, oh, I'm going to do it everything with humans. Then you know that the cost is going to be high and the speed might be somewhere lower, but you know what you're getting
Yeah.
because quality is also high. Right now, that is the degrees of change are a lot smaller. That's what I think. And I think, will it ever disappear? No, the gap is always going to be there because you're always, what is not part of the levers is customer choice, and customer choice might
Yeah.
be, I want humans, and if they want humans,
Yeah.
latency will always be part of it. So yeah, there's never going to be a flat line. That's my head.
We'll continue to need to manage expectations
Yes.
on that front, right?
Yeah.
It's just always going to be there. So, what part of the localization, the language technology pipeline, do you think is still under optimized these days when it comes to AI? We've seen obviously some significant advancement in certain areas of the language business, the language industry, as it were. Um, what is there an area that you think is still under optimized that we could deliver some outsized results if we took a closer look? Or to put it another way, what are some of the more underrated or overlooked parts of the language technology pipeline that could be optimized but often aren't or have been overlooked?
Absolutely. Everything that's around the translation and the interpretation piece. If you look, you have platforms that work on this, but we still
Yeah,
work a lot with project managers. We still work a lot with manual assignment. We still work a lot, and I say a lot. This, of course, is not. It's generalization. There's companies out there that are trying to do it automatically. We, for example, are doing automatic assignments and things like that. Not all of the LSPs do it. Not all of the interpretation companies do it, but it does happen, right? But at a vast
yeah,
majority, we're still just scratching the surface on what can AI help us with. That is not the translation bit. Like, that is not the core bit. What can it help me with doing, making certain decisions for me in the whole process? Like, imagine assignments for interpretation requests, and it just looks at, I have a pool of 5 interpreters and I just take a decision on which one I think is going to be better based on previous comments and structures, and I do that through AI. We're not really using
yeah,
that for a thing. So I think finance as one of the departments within the industry that doesn't take. Having said that, I say within the industry, finance is kind of outside of the industry. But you know where I'm going with this. Like, we could do a lot of AI handling in between those works because they're part of the life cycle of what you're doing, anyways. We just don't think of it as part of the industry. So I think a lot of things around it. If you go to translation, filtering of files, filtering of content, transformation of files, look at desktop publishing. If you look at the um, standard content goes in the translation pipeline, like Gemini's capabilities now around transforming images is a very interesting thing for desktop publishing. If you look at interpretation, real-time setup, would we ever want to translate, like, if you have an event or anything else going on, do you want to translate something that's on screen using AI? Do you want to have anything around it being done with AI? I think that's just scratching the surface because everybody went for the, oh, it can translate, I'm going to use it. And I think right now we need
yeah,
to look at other things. Yeah.
yeah. Just sort of adding on to that conversation on speed, quality, price, uh, and uh, looking at you raise finance. I mean, there's some industries that are very risk averse. The highly regulated industries, healthcare, finance, law, legal. Um, I, Probably a good time to maybe have a chat about quality expectations and rethinking those in the age of AI powered uh, language support. The definition of quality seems to be evolving right now. How do you think companies should rethink their own quality metrics? Based on what we just talked about, rethinking those, the expectations, managing those expectations around these quality metrics in the age of MT and AI, especially now when AI is doing a lot of the more of the heavy lifting. Um, let's spend a little bit of time talking about redefining what quality seems to mean. How is that changing? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it's a really important thing to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on a very important point when you said industry regulations that define sometimes, that actually not define, sorry, that forces you to define the process around those regulations sometimes. So that is
Yeah,
that is a big thing and an important thing, because if those regulations do not let you use AI, you can't change the lever. The lever that we were speaking before will always be, I need a human. So this is where your human in the loop goes, and this is where I'm saying, like, there is the expectation that, oh, humans are not going to do this anymore. Yeah, but have you ever tried to change a regulation? So that's part of it. Like, I don't think some
yeah,
of the niche things are going to change very drastically very quickly. Now, quality wise, on the other hand, I'm going to make another analogy: bank systems and their support structures, right? You used to be able to go into a bank and have a conversation with a person or a teller about doing something. You used to be able to call somebody, and it used to not be um, a menu that you go over the phone, and at some point you get to speak to someone. That's going away. You're starting
right.
now to speak to bots that are going to speak to you very naturally and very fine. But with that, every user needs to understand, and I'm making that analogy on the lowest of cases, like direct to user customer support. Every user will need to make some concessions about what the bot cannot do. And at some point, when the bot finally cannot solve it for you, then you're going to be sent to
Yeah,
someone. But you've already made some concessions as a creator of the system about what your, let's say, the level of patience of the human speaking to the bot is, right? I think it's the same thing here.
yeah,
I think with quality, it's going to be okay, but if I want it faster and cheaper, I will need to make some concessions in quality, with the difference of, on the lever that we were talking before, the concessions are not going to be as high, and as time goes on, the concessions are going to be smaller and smaller. I think the quality is going to be better and better for you to be able to say this is good enough. Now,
yeah,
that is going to vary depending on the buyer choice, because good enough for customer support means, can it translate what I'm saying? Good enough for conversational interpretation is, can it translate what I'm saying? Good enough for a
yeah,
medical interpretation of very specific things between a patient and a doctor is very different. And that is where you cannot say, well, it's good enough. That is my view for now. So this is that
yeah.
conversation around quality.
Well, it's the you know the decision there is, particularly in healthcare, could be a life or death or just
Yes.
quality of life. Huge quality of life differentiation. I mean, we're seeing it in the banks too. I mean, a lot of the banks I see now have rushed to eliminate, bank tellers, and I think are finding now that uh, they have these concierge services now, but the concierge services are being brought back in to handle sort of a lot of the transactional stuff because, sorry, the automated system isn't able to support uh, the level of complexity. Anything that's outside of put money in, take money out, still sort of requires some sort of interaction that the bots aren't going to be able to handle. Not
Absolutely.
saying never, but at the moment, I'm already seeing pushback on
Absolutely.
that. A lot of grumpy bank customers these days.
Yes, and that brings you exactly to what I was saying: the level of concession that you need to give to make this work, right? The
Yeah.
level of concession that you're
Yeah.
able to go and say, I'm going to go for this.
We often hear about this shift from linguistic perfection to fitness for purpose. How do you guide clients and users through that mindset change?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think it ties very well with the quality that we're speaking about. There is the non-purposeful acceptance of what we just discussed about, which is there is going to be some concessions that you need to give, right? If you want to
Yeah.
approach fully AI. Now, there is also a level where you need to educate customers into what quality really means, because you have it in interpretation, you have it in translation, you have review is subjective, so is translation. You have ideas moved from one language to the other, which means my opinion, although the idea is the same, might be spoken differently, might be written differently. Same challenge with review. You have a lot of opinionated reviewers out there. And the challenge is the opinion on a review is not necessarily quality. This is very important when you look at enterprise, because opinions need to be in line with the brand or whatever company you're working with, or whatever structure you're working with. In interpretation, it would be you need to interpret directly in line with, this is medical, so you need to be
Yeah.
in line with what's there in those, so that there's no opinions around it. And if there were, they need to be consistent. I think that's the toughest part of it, the consistency in opinions, because you don't have, as we spoke before about, when you don't have a language operation, you don't have a LangOps team, you don't have a structure, you have just, let's say, standard, I would say random reviewers, people that you send the text to. I used to make a joke about this, and the joke was usually, somebody at the office would say, "Oh, I know somebody in the third floor that has a cousin that speaks Spanish, so they're going to review it for me." Well, no, that they
Yeah.
can't, because that's not it, and they're going to bring their opinions. They're not part of the brand. They don't know. That's the challenge with review, the opinionated nature of it, and the fact that it's not consistent. If we were able to make it consistent, then you can get to a line where that review can define your quality does fit for purpose. But that quality fit for purpose also needs to go in line with your levers. That's the whole conversation behind it.
Yeah. Well, we are perpetually working and living in a preferential industry in the language industry, and
Yeah.
it's always been the case, right? As you say, it's subjective. I mean, there are certain expectations and certain standards have been set in place, but again, particularly in the interpreting space, it could be completely technically well executed interpretation session, and you'll still get preferential commentary and objections and what have you. So interpreters are very
Absolutely.
familiar with that. Um,
Absolutely.
Speaking of interpreters, I mean, we've played with some of the speech to speech technologies at BoostLingo. We
let me
have,
let me just go back on that thought for a second, because you're absolutely right in what you were saying, and that also shows you how the life cycles are completely different. It's not only the opinions at the end of the interpretation, but the fact that because you're interpreting, you depend on the content being fed to you, and that content can be impacted by your ability to listen, what sound equipment you have, how the person is speaking. Are they speaking directly to you? Because sometimes
yeah,
interpreters would actually read lips. So if they're speaking
that's right.
sideways, they might not be. So that all goes back into that upstream thing that we were speaking before. I think it's an important point to make, because again, it goes, in my view, about what content creation is, although in interpretation it's more difficult to manage, but you have ways to control some of it: proper equipment, proper structure, proper setup. So when I say proper, is going down to consistency, right? And then you eliminate all of those variables and you end up with only opinions and choices being variables. And those were sadly not going to go away. You can educate to a point.
It's 100% right. And every interpreter will tell you that, especially, when you're in a remote simultaneous situation, you are juggling technology, sound quality, sound interruptions. There are so many different variables in the mix there. And
Yep.
even in consecutive, community interpreting, there are just things that are beyond the control, the interpreting force majeures that you cannot
Yep.
anticipate, and not to mention that you're running and strumming guitar and chewing gum at the same time. As an interpreter, there's a
Exactly.
lot.
Yes.
The cognitive load is just massive, and then you add the element of surprise or what have you,
Yep.
can change the whole situation again. Um, I I wanted to talk a little bit about the speech-to-speech technologies that we're seeing in interpreting AI support for interpreting. Um, how close are we to a world where machine interpreting plays any kind of a meaningful role in business critical conversations? What are you seeing? What are your feelings around that? We get this question quite a bit. I get it quite a bit, and I'm always interested to hear what others are seeing out there. So
I think the role is already there. Speech to speech has proven to be good enough, but then we go down to what
yeah,
is your level of concession? You can use speech to speech today, and it's going to work to a point. So, depending on what you're doing, and this is where we go back, content matters. Depending on what you're doing and the purpose for it, you can say yes, it's going to be a big thing, or no. As a simple example, look at people that use Google today to do back and forth interpretation of what they're speaking about. Like they Google, lift up the phone, speak to the phone, it says something back. Translation might be okay, might not be. Like but this is a user, let's say a lowest level of standard user that would be me doing touristing in Japan. Let's make that analogy, right? I know there might be some mistakes, but I'm willing to make them because I'm just, walking the streets of Japan. And if I make a mistake, a nice person there will help me out. And I try with my phone to get somewhere. We know there's going to be mistakes, but I could use that technology. Are
yeah,
you willing to make same concessions in the example that we were making about the doctor speaking to their patient before? No.
got
I wouldn't. I would say, yeah, it's straightforward. Say no, I wouldn't. So this
it.
is
No,
where we go into, this is where we go into, okay, the technology is there, but it has a lot to learn to let it make some, let's call them decisions in high stake, high risk environments. So I think that's where we're at. And any tool that's able to integrate that technology will be the one that gets out on top.
yeah, yeah. Interesting times. Just sort of looking forward a little bit on the horizon. Well, I- a lot of the multilingual LLMs right now, obviously the hot topic. What's your take? Are they coming from your background? You know, you've seen this progression. What are they a disruption? Are they an enhancement? Are they something in between? Is this a threat? Is it opportunity, or is it both for our industry right now? What's your take moving forward?
No, um, I'm of the positive mindset. I think it's an enhancement, as NMT was before. It just shifts how people do the work. Of course, certain people don't see it like that. I think there's a tit for that. Let's take the example of neural machine translation when it came over, right? And even today, by today's standards, if you don't train the model on exactly what you need, it's not good enough.
For a company that's just starting to adopt AI today, SMB, even large enterprise companies that are jumping into the AI space in localization and in their language uh, technology trajectory roadmap, whatever you want to call it. What's one key piece of advice that you would give to organizations for them to avoid costly mistakes moving forward?
Yeah, I think as we said before we started the podcast on some of these questions, I think the main one for me would be approach it from from the view of strategy rather than a tactical solution to something that's a problem in the now. Approach it from no, this needs a strategic answer. Approach it from this LangOps view, this language operation view. You know that you need to start translating. You need to know that you know that you need languages in your structure, put it in a strategy, plan for it, set it up correctly. Because any short answer to some of the things is going to cost you more down the line. And it goes with what your processes are, how they need to change to adapt this to be very seamless downstream, and that can be in interpretation, that can be in translation, localization, anywhere. Like I'll give you a very specific example. It might look very simple for, let's say, a nascent startup as a SaaS to translate their interface of their mobile app to another language, and it is at the beginning. So because you send it to developers, developers within their sprint use some tool to translate stuff, bring it back, it's all great. And a lot of the times it's going to be, oh, I use Google Translate to translate and it's good enough. Yeah, that's not a process, that's a tactical solution to a problem that I have now. Later, when you need to start translating content or you need something else, you're going to try to use that same tactical solution and it's not going to work. So you're going to be scrambling and you're going to have issues. Look at it from the strategy standpoint all the way from the beginning. The moment you know that you need languages in your operation, that's going to ease so much of it down the line. And it's also going to let you conserve budget. It's going to be less costly and less problematic when you need to look at the high level solutions. I think that's one of the key takeaways from my learnings across the years. It's not always easy to do it though. I say it like it's it's this intuitive thing, and it is, but it's not easy to do it, and that's the challenge because there's very little thought of it strategically, either within departments or at a C-suite level. That's the main challenge, and I think that's what companies should avoid.
Yeah, I think that's sound guidance, Stevan. Stevan, are you ready for the second hour of this conversation?
Absolutely, let's go for it. Are you ready to give it 2 hours more?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Although, am I?
Who knows?
Just kidding. Yeah. Joking aside, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We're at the top of the hour, and I want to just say thanks so much for joining me today from the BoostLingual offices.
Yes.
In sunny, balmy Austin, Texas. Thank you so much. Thanks for helping us unpack and peek into what the strategic AI-powered language technology roadmap might look like. And I say might.
Because we still don't know yet.
Because we know, man, this is just exciting times and things are changing. But I think we're on the right track. Most importantly, thank you for taking time off from your Texas road trip to drop in on us and have a chat. And now you can just go find some Austin barbecue brisket.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Around the corner.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invite, Dieter. Thank you to BoostCast, and I hope to be here again.
Absolutely. Well, the way things are going, I think we could check in with some level of periodic cadence, as they say. For our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and drop us a review. And of course, you can follow Stevan's work and Unbabel's latest innovations as well on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us here on BoostCast. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.